Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Courtney Boyd Myers. Courtney is the co-founder and CEO of AKUA, a modern brand and a mission to become a household name for sustainable sea greens-based foods. She began her career in kelp as an advisor to Greenwave, a nonprofit that supports the regenerative ocean farming industry. Her love of food doesn't stop at the sea. She was the first investor in her husband's business, Unframed Ice Cream, a Cape Town-based ice cream brand that was named #1 in the world in 2019. When she's not hustling sea vegetables and vegan ice cream, Courtney is a global community ambassador to Summit, a community and events company that brings together innovators and creatives for immersive events. Courtney Boyd Myers has lived and worked between dozens of international cities, including New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Panama City, Buenos Aires, Tulum, London, Berlin, Cape Town, Dubai, and Lisbon. She began her career as a journalist at Forbes magazine and The Next Web, and has been recognized as one of the Fast Company's most creative people in business. She is the creator of 3 popular Facebook groups, including Sloan's List, a 10,000-person group that has helped hundreds of people find jobs and hire talent, Yes Nomads, a curated community for private home sharing, and OMG CPG, a community of founders of consumer packaged goods companies. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Courtney Boyd Myers. She's the co-founder and CEO of AKUA. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So happy to have you. Please tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, well, full name is Courtney Boyd Myers. I'm on the internet everywhere as CBM. So I started my career out as a journalist, moved into tech and startup land, and then basically turned the corner on 30 and started thinking really seriously about addressing climate change. I had grown up in a family where my dad was a big food marketer for big food companies like Burger King and Frito-Lay and Keebler Elves. And I just, saw firsthand, and I love my dad, but I saw firsthand, these big food companies and the impact that they had on, creating unhealthy foods for us as humans. But also I started learning more about big food's impact on the planet, when it comes to like these huge monocrops, like soil degradation, polluting our water supplies, thinking about the effects of factory farming. And so all of that led me to my first kelp farm, which led me to starting AKUA.
Amazing. And it's so interesting, your dad's background too. I mean,
Yeah.
As much as it's like, the fact that those corporations exist is now possibly a threat to the planet due to climate change. But at the same time, that learning curve is sort of leading to such innovations, because if you haven't had that exposure, maybe you wouldn't be already innovating in your mind as a kid, like how to find alternatives. And I think for us millennials, I feel like there's like a relationship with those fast food chains where it starts with love. I remember a McDonald's kids menu, and how big of an event that was.
Yep.
And awareness around climate issues or environmental issues, zero. And then you're slowly growing, wait, is this real food? And then from there, you're also oh my God, it's hurting our planet. And then what are we going to do about it? I think millennials sort of grew up with that. Do you really feel that?
Yeah. I mean, I think about innovation cycles all the time like that. We can't be too upset about what came before us, because we wouldn't be doing what we are doing today without it. And
True.
yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a little kid, every time we passed a McDonald's, I used to have to pretend to pee, because I just loved it when my mom took me in there and there was the slides and the balls and the plastic toy. And yeah, I mean, I totally bought into that. I had no idea. My parents were very well educated, also hadn't woken up to what was going on. I mean, yeah, we've seen a amazing, surgence of education and awareness around climate change. And so now it's just do you choose to act on that, or do you choose to ignore it?
Exactly. And I think companies like AKUA and really personal products that are out there is really helping you to become an activist on a day-to-day, because I think, and I would love to get your thought on this too, climate change is a big word, right? And often
people don't even know how to relate to the subject. And I think there is now more and more, obviously, awareness and efforts through more accessible and perceivable information and just events out there. And even the books that are coming out now are really like not using over fancy terms to further complicate it, but really trying to get the message through.
Yeah.
And I do find like a lot of I feel like a lot of people are questioning like, well, what do I do on a day to day? Everything I'm doing is sort of like, you know, acting as a culprit almost. But then like one is greater than zero at the same time, right? There is like always a way to get started. And really it starts with small actions. And I think you guys are like the perfect example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have this idea, right, when we're growing up in school of like, what's your gateway drug? And everyone's like, marijuana is like your gateway drug to like, you know, heroin, which is like not totally true at all, because I smoked a lot of weed and never did heroin. But I think that, you know, we do have these entry points into totally new habits and lifestyles. And some of them can be, yeah, like a kelp jerky bag where you start to make that connection. You know, that mind shift happens around like, oh, wow, like where does my food come from? How is it made? Is it made in a planet friendly way? Is it healthy for me? And then, you know, that mind shift happens through the mouth. A lot of people like, you know, sort of bash like the whole reusable straw industry because it like, you know, makes people feel like they're doing something good. But I'm actually a big fan of things like that because it's that one reusable straw idea led me to start carrying around my, you know, bamboo fork and knife and spoon. And, you know, I think for me, the entry point into more sustainable living was as simple as a reusable water bottle and carrying that around everywhere. And then, you know, all the other things sort of like dominoes came into place. So, you know, the little triggers in life, if they even seem little, can add up to big things.
Yeah, and really like not having like double thinking everything, yes, and not just like criticizing and trying to find your own way. I think, you know, to exactly your point, when there was like a conversation on straws being eliminated fully, well, straws also are a real like accessibility tool. So you can't just like say like, okay, no more straws. Like you have to come up with an alternative, right? And like, why not reusable straws and carrying around them then? Like my friend who has a disability and can't use either of her arms, she does carry her straw around with her. And that's like normal for her. That's like how she functions in a day. And that can basically become the thing for like everyone, and try to like stick to it too. I remember, and you know, New York City, like it's not the most environmentally friendly city for sure. And like plastic bags are thrown out at supermarkets here and there, and like same in Turkey. So I'm like very used to that. And it's very easy to give up on like, oh, I don't have a tote bag with me, I'll just get a bag. And so I started a tote bag policy at home. And so like we're carrying tote bags in our bags, like we're never getting a plastic. And I actually sort of turned it into like, it really started as a failure in the beginning. Like I would always forget the tote bag, or then I would feel bad about it. I would try to carry it home in my arms and then breaking eggs and things like that. But that learning curve, like now I always have a tote bag. Like you just really need to sort of push yourself to like get started somehow. And
Totally.
I think when it comes to food, we're even more creatures of habits, right? Like whatever we ate throughout like our childhood, that's like sort of something everybody feels like, well, not everybody, but there's a big population that really feel passionate about those and like not giving up on that, which like largely is also around meat and meat consumption, right? And also like I guess like this would be a little bit like discussion on like the issues. I think it could be cool to like deep dive on like why do we need to find alternatives. So a little bit diagnosis around that I think we can discuss first, and to sort of make clear like why do we need to find more sustainable ways.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, you know, the growing planet thing's pretty scary because it's a big global problem, and we as a society don't have ways to solve global problems. I think we've seen that firsthand with the pandemic. You know, you have countries and making decisions independently of each other that affect everyone, and you have states, same thing in the United States. You know, we basically have 50 countries.
Yeah.
And for the pandemic, there are so many ways that it mirrored kind of the climate, the environmental issues we have going on, because if we can't figure out how to all work together, we can't keep each other safe. And so I don't think actually solutions have been made. I think in some ways we've politically just had all these leaders that are so nationalist and, so we're doing this right, everyone else is doing this wrong. And instead of saying something like, we're all doing this wrong, let's think about how we can all do it better with the resources we have and the needs that these growing populations have. We're nowhere close, but I think the pandemic really put a focus on this idea that we need more globalism. We need more union as a species when the species is threatened, right? So I think on a just to sort of zoom in on, so people don't feel lost that as consumers they can't do anything. I think that the most important thing that every consumer can do is think about how their dollars are spent. If you do choose to eat meat, that's your personal choice, but make sure you're educated around factory farming and that from a perspective of land and water use and animal morality, exactly what those choices are supporting. I have a lot of friends who are like, yeah, but I only eat grass-fed beef. And it's from the local butcher in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I'm like, good for you. I'm so happy you can afford that. And then you have access to that, but that's not the rest of the world. So
Exactly.
To feed a growing population, we have to think about food sources and protein sources and crops that can do that at scale. Which is one of the reasons that kelp farming is so amazing, because you can grow insane amounts of nutritious food without using fresh water. You don't need dry land. You don't need fertilizer or feed. And as these huge crops are growing in the ocean, it's helping to deacidify the ocean. It's creating more biodiversity. It has all these benefits. And I think that's why people are so excited about the potential of kelp farming right now.
Yeah. And in addition to exactly what you said in terms of this really multidisciplinary, multi-background, multi-ethnical collaboration that we need to do in order to be able to really make an impact on what has also already happened in the planet, we do need a lot of awareness and education on it. It's so crazy. We consume so much and so many different things throughout the day. It's so easy to miss out on the background information on what we're consuming, right? Whenever we have these podcast sessions or panels, I'm always fascinated about something that I haven't known. And I would like to think that I do a lot of research or reading and interviews on these subjects and try to educate myself. But we would have a conversation maybe around more what's wrong with fashion. I would be shocked at some of the stats I'm hearing there. And then as food, I'm shocked at something else. It's always, and then I'm if I'm shocked and I'm trying to educate myself already in these, imagine how is this going to reach the mass public? This has to be known by the mass public. So we can't have enough awareness and education efforts in these better and sustainable methods. And that awareness and education, I feel also has to be adopted by not only higher authorities, I would say, that sort of become the thought leaders. UN can publish something and that's sort of more accepted, or there could be a more governmental policy and suddenly then you have to already act on it. But at the same time, it's the healthcare industry, right? Our dietitians, our doctors, our practitioners, it has to, I feel now I'm looking back for myself, I have been a vegetarian for I don't know, 15 years of my life. Amazing. Until and then I got pregnant. And then suddenly I was nobody's telling me about, if me not consuming something would have am I missing out on something? Am I also deciding on behalf of my child? Is this right? So I started to question all these things, which I couldn't really go anywhere to ask about, no dietitian or nutritionist. And nutritionists would be you will be fine if you just consume plant-based, you'll be fine. But I didn't have a backing to it, it's so historically, and maybe just it's a habit too. That's what we've seen from the past, that you're kind of am I doing something wrong by just not consuming and more having a diverse diet or whatnot. So I ate a little bit like throughout my pregnancy. And then when my daughter was born and she started to eat food, I'm like, do I like decide on her behalf and she doesn't eat now? Or does that create, like, if I enforce that at an early age, does that create any, weird relationship with food? Should she decide on her own? So I just like whatever she wants, she eats now. But then should I feel guilty because I'm, like all these like back and forth questions. Also because there is no good recommendations or guidance from like pediatricians either on the subject, so you kind of feel scared to just like try the new way of eating for your own child. I don't know if this makes sense, but do you relate to this at all? Like, how do we sort of like the things that we change for ourselves, even like, how do we pass it on is something that I've been like thinking about.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you have to just listen and be like super in tune with your body. Try to shut off the brain, try to tune into the gut. I'm a big fan of like where you just sort of try to sense when you're around something, how you feel about it. Like I sometimes will, it's kind of somewhere between like Luke Skywalker's The Force and Marie Kondo's Does This Bring Me Joy? And so, I will pick up, like, let's just say even a body lotion. And I'm like, does this have something in it that's good for me? Like, should I be putting this on my skin? And I try to just tune in and sense that. So with food, it's sort of the same thing. It's just like, do I want to be eating this right now? Like, how does it make me feel? Like, does it give me the right kind of energy? How do I feel after it? And at this point, like if you're pregnant, like it's all just about you. I mean, like, don't worry about the baby. You're the baby making machine at this point. And then when it comes to like when the baby's having foods, like I think offering babies different foods and seeing what they like is going to be just an amazing learning experience.
Yeah. And just like be open to more alternatives to just do that and not like stick to traditional recommendations, I feel like, because as policy lags, so many of these like big industry recommendations also lag. So they're not going to catch up on, our recommendations are updated based on like climate change efforts. That's not going to come from healthcare industry anytime soon.
Nope.
So it's really about like sort of educating ourselves and having an open mind. And, even if we, I guess, like don't want to push the next generation on anything, even like starting with this education as a younger age should be a huge benefit, right? Like questioning what you're consuming. And in the end, they would make the right decision, right? Like we were talking about our childhood, like McDonald's was a cool thing, like I feel like my daughter, when she grows up, is going to be like, you used plastic? Like, what were you guys thinking? I feel like I'm going to be judged big time.
Oh, we all are. But and that's why we have to have a little sympathy for our parents, like they didn't exactly know what they were doing, and that's totally fine. I look at things like the way my parents have brought us up, just to love and to be grateful. And, that's kind of like all you can really ask for from your parents is like be a good person. And everything else, like food changes so fast, like it's about soy 1 minute and then soy's out, and now it's about pea protein, and like, is pea protein out? And like, in like the Atkins diet and like high fat, and now it's plant-based. And so like, I think like we're learning all the time. And again, you just have to kind of like move into that like Marie Kondo, like Luke Skywalker vibe. And just the most important relationship you have in this life is really with yourself. And like, and knowing what makes you feel good. There's an amazing book I read very early on called Eating for Your Blood Type. And basically what it says is like some of the older blood types, like O as an example, like really need meat. They developed like, they're like the caveman diet. And then I'm an A negative, and I'm a much newer blood type and much more like I can handle a vegetarian diet much better. And so I try not to be too judgy because like, I don't need to eat meat. Like I really don't like it. I would 100, I feel so good eating plant-based, but I also recognize that, you know, not everyone might feel like that.
Right, right. I think the biggest problem begins with, and this is also with like plastic and fashion and all of it. It's just the overconsumption, right? Like we're not eating meat like in the United States. We're eating bacon on top of meat on top of other meat, you know, like we're just like overkill, and like the illusion that we need meat every in 3 courses or like throughout the day in separate meals. Like we don't. Maybe we need it once a week. Maybe some people, as you said, like because of their they have a more like blood condition, maybe they need it twice a week, but maybe they need once a month. So I think like exactly to your point, as science possibly also like supports and gives us more insights about our body, and the more we learn about our body, we'll probably also be more educated on what to consume. You know, there are so many things that we don't even know why we have a stomach ache. Maybe we're allergic to something. Like so many things are unknown about our body, and we don't question. We consume what we're advertised, and or what is available at a restaurant or a grocery store. And that is the biggest problem. And we're just like constantly pushed to consume, which is in the end the biggest culprit. Like this wasn't an issue before Industrial Revolution. We created this problem with ourselves. Like there were ads in 1950s on like the throwaway life. Everything should be plastic and you just toss it away, you never do dishes again and whatnot. You know, like this was advertised heavily, as you said, like prior generations.
Yeah,
it's hard to judge them. And the first ever podcast we did was on how media is the biggest culprit in climate change, because in the end the biggest problem comes from our like overuse and overconsumption of so many things. And I think that is like obviously one thing that we need to figure out about ourselves, but also we do need innovations and companies like AKUA, who is sort of pushing this through in various verticals, I guess, or various fields. Like if meat consumption still needs to exist to a certain extent, how do you do it sustainably, right? So that is still a question. But we also need to have many more alternatives. And you're right, it's so interesting that I remember now, like I attended an event called Forum for the Futures event on the future of food. And there were all these like food vendors who had all these different like resources at the time, which I think the year was 2016 or something. And I think crickets maybe were a big conversation then. I remember just eating a lot of cricket bars, and that was the like future, like talked about as like the future alternative to meat. And I feel like I don't hear it anymore. Like am I making this up, like, or does it really like change as fast as you said?
So, I mean, I think, you know, to your point around like, how do we create meat in a sustainable way? I think one of the most interesting things is actually like cellular based agriculture. You know, I think this will become affordable. And at the end of the day, like what person, if they could choose between eating a cow or burger, a beef burger that had been grown in a petri dish versus an animal that had been grown up, torn away from its family members, slaughtered in front of its friends, like the kind of people that would choose the latter, like we should be calling them not to be extreme, but like you're an asshole.
I do agree.
Yeah. Like, and so I think that there are going to be ways to feed people meat sustainably. It's just going to take probably another decade to get there, especially on a global level. I think funding those companies is just amazing. And then I think there's going to be a lot of people who really will, like myself, understand that like, I don't need to eat meat just because a restaurant decides to have 90% of its menu in meat. Like there are going to be a big growing number of people, I hope, that are like, actually a plant-based diet really works for me. And maybe I'll eat meat on Thanksgiving with my family. And it's back to the way meat used to be, which is this beautiful celebratory sacrificial type of experience, you know, where we like really honor the animal, and
Right.
it's not a daily, or like you were saying earlier, bacon on top of pork, you know, like the breakfast, lunch, and dinner meat thing is not healthy for anyone. You know, we have massive obesity rates, heart disease rates. Like I met a guy in Atlanta at a barbecue place the other day, last week, and he was fit. And he was telling us about how much he was going to eat. And I was like, wow, you know, you've like, you know, I said this to a stranger. I was like, you have a really nice body. Like, you know, you look really fit. And he was like, yeah, but I have 2 stents. So he had like, you know, he's like in his 40s, at risk of a heart attack, and is, yes, in good shape. So I think you have 50% obesity, and then you have a lot of people who are internally are eating too much meat and things like that are happening. Right. So I think to your point, again, like, you know, we have to lower the meat consumption. We have to get it to sustainable ways to eat it. But like, again, like we have to deprogram masculinity in meat, because it does not mean that you are manly because you're eating meat, or that you're that cool chick who drinks beer and hangs out with guys because you eat meat. Like we need to get rid of that and the sort of feminism, hippiness around plant-based eating. That's just bullshit. Yeah. So this is going to take a lot of change, and it's going to come through like just conversations around the dinner table.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of, you know, faith in Gen Z, because like, first of all, I remember we had an episode with Duncan Baker Brown, who was amazing, and he's an expert in circular economy. And he was saying like this year, he's a professor at University of Birmingham, and he was saying this year, first time ever, I had my freshmen that were all climate strikers. And that's the first, right? And that, like, even growing up with that mindset and going into a college education with that mindset, like it's leaps and bounds forward than how we started, you know. Like I'm looking back, like I consumed very irresponsibly for a good amount of my life, I feel like, and I feel guilty, and now all I can do is like act however like better I can now, and also try to educate and raise awareness and move, like pass on better habits to the next generation. Like that's all I can focus on, and that's all we can do, and that's fine. I think, you know, as you said, there's the big need of global, like diverse collaboration that needs to take place in order to push this change through. But also our mindsets really need to change. Like we can't be lazy about it. We can't just make up excuse. We can't just always opt in for convenience as soon as possible, you know. Like we have to sort of call ourselves out also on all these like habits that either we adopted by media or just because it's easy. You know, I think it's fine to sort of push ourselves a little bit and feel a little responsible. And it also, I guess, I would love to get your thoughts on this. I mean, technology and innovation, like I mean, that's always the bottom up push, right? Like, and then sort of like the corporate cultures, the big industries, politics, policy, that always lags. Yeah. It is a slow push, but it's maybe a more sustainable push and more, I guess, well digested as it moves forward. But at the same time, not only policy lags, when climate change especially becomes a conversation in politics, it sort of pulls us back, right, from all the progress that we're doing. I know this is probably a very big question, like how to sort of separate church and state, you know. Yeah. But I guess like my question would be more like, what is the sort of discussion or opinion about the industry and the innovators in general on how to get around this? Because governments are pulling us back, really. And we're talking about like also global collaboration, and forget all governments of the world, you know, like it has to be like separated from politics. And I guess, are there any conversations around this at all?
Not at a government level that I've seen. Maybe where you see it are addressing school food programs. But it is a extremely controversial topic. And I know, you know, very little about World governments on this, to be honest with you, but what I've seen from the United States is you have these intense lobby groups for these meat industries that have put politicians in power. And so it hasn't become a political topic the way climate change has and around renewable energies. I think if anything, we've seen the Biden administration really be aggressive on wanting to create new jobs in the renewable energy sector here locally in the United States, wanting to curb emissions, working with car manufacturers to, move from gas to electric. There hasn't been the conversations about food systems that I've seen. I'd love to be proven otherwise or be more educated around this. I've seen that all coming from the private sector, for sure. So again, food is so intensely personal and cultural, almost like a religion, right? And so to tell someone we should eat less meat is it's the equivalent of telling some people to like pray less to God, because it's so ingrained in their culture and their families and, and in religion too, right? Like the Sunday roast. So I got chills just thinking about that, because I think it's a huge hot button topic that is probably not even like our generation's fight. Like it's probably like the 20-year-olds that are coming up now. But we'll see, and I think what will be cool is when we have world leaders being like, I'm going more plant-based. And then you see sort of more influencer strategy there, like leading from an example versus like it trickling down to policy.
Right. A lot of responsibility for companies like AKUA to really also act as change agents, not just go about your day and like do business operations, but also, all awareness means possible, like education, events, like all of these innovative companies sort of need to act like mini PR agencies almost, I feel like, to just raise more awareness on this and create more conversation, because in the end, if there is consumer demand, there's going to be supply, and there's going to be more supply, and there will be more willingness to even these like big corporates in the meat industry to provide alternatives within their business model and sort of shift, right? So it all comes down to, I guess, consumer awareness and education, which is like one of the main reasons why we do these like podcast series, because we always say there's no solution to any problem without education of the mass public and really the consumer. Right. And this, we see the same thing in architecture, when we're looking at a space to live in, we're not necessarily thinking of, was it built ethically, sustainably? What are the materials used in this building? It's more like, does it have a balcony and an extra bathroom and all these more, day-to-day like questions, but not necessarily a deeper understanding of what am I living in. So I think it also goes to like, what am I consuming? What is this for my body? And this again goes back to people like you sort of talking about these healthy and tasty alternatives, like really helping people understand like, this is tasty. It's not like you're eating grass, right? Like you actually just need to be open-minded and try it. And also, sort of seeing these like supportive fields and industries to also talk about, like the book you mentioned, Eating for Your Blood Type. That's already so much more educating on how you should consume things, and could also eventually just lead to less consumption of meat, because people are just better educated on how to consume for themselves, right? So in that sense, it's like, it would be very cool to see more and more collaborations between like companies like you, the nutritionists, the journalists, the writers, and your diverse background is actually a great example of like how all those like skill sets coming together. What are some of the, I guess, like collaborative efforts you see out there that are like diverse and sort of trying to work on like raising more awareness in this? Any thoughts or any like examples that you would want to share?
I mean, I think when it comes to raising more awareness around like changing eating habits, like the biggest things I've seen be effective are like sitting around a dining table and children educating their parents. It's like, and then parents being like, oh, okay, but you really have to go after like primary food purchasers, right? Like at the end of the day, and then I would say also like chefs, because that's what's dictating what's in our restaurants, and that's what's dictating what comes into our homes. So, like an alliance of moms would be like an amazing idea, to sort of shift movements around food. And we're seeing chefs for sure do it, which is amazing. I think in general, the sort of chef population is doing a really good job to offer more plant-based food options, to talk, because they're the ones in the back of the restaurants chopping up seafood, right, every day, and watching the blood and guts spew on the floor. And like, you can become desensitized to that, but like never completely. Right. So,
yeah.
I think like those are probably the two target markets for the shifts to happen from are moms and chefs.
Moms and chefs.
And we're working with both of them really closely at AKUA, like I think moms and chefs are like my two favorite demo groups to just be marketing to and talking to and partnering with.
Such an amazing point. And I think you should write a book called Moms and Chefs.
Yes.
It's already like super catchy.
How moms and chefs are trying to change the world.
Exactly. Moms and chefs for a better future. Okay, this is amazing. I think we can talk about this like for hours, but we do need to wrap up. And before we do, I would love for you to give advice to anyone that is going into a field that is going to be difficult. They're going to need to push boundaries and they're going to have to push for progress. What would you say to them?
What would I say to anyone who wants to push boundaries and try to create progress? Is that the question?
Like you.
Yeah. This might sound cheesy, but number one is taking care of your health and yourself. Like you can't go out there and run yourself ragged and burn yourself out. Like the number one thing that I think has enabled me to be an innovator, pioneer, an entrepreneur, and creating a company that's creating change in the world is like saying no to a lot of social interactions, to just getting into bed at 10 p.m. at night, half of the days a week, to telling my team at 11 a.m., hey guys, like before our team meeting, like I'm doing yoga, just sort of sticking up for yourself and leading by example as much as possible.
That's amazing. I mean, healthy body, healthy mind, healthy practice, right? I guess like following that. Thank you so much, Courtney. This was so lovely. We do encourage everyone to continue to follow AKUA and all the things that you guys are doing, and also encourage everyone to go eat a kelp burger. And thank you so much for joining us today. This was so great.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. Make sure to visit our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can find our handles in the description below. And don't forget to join us next week. See you.